recruits, and welcome to the Frontlines and the battle against the deep state, the cabal, the Illuminonkeys, and all those that wish to enslave all of humanity for their own selfish reasons. Well, today, a very interesting day. I'm looking at what was the Senate hearings on censorship, led by Ted Cruz. And some very interesting people he brought up to talk about what's going on. And what it leads into is really talking about Antifa and how they're organized, Black Lives Matter as well, and really what the battle is. So I entitled this one, American Civil War 2.0, because this is where we're being forced by the deep state to go. The good thing is that it's not happening. We don't want that. We don't want there to be fighting in the streets between both sides. But they're going to keep increasing the pressure for that to happen. So we're going to look into that and see, what are they doing, how are they doing it, and analyze, how this is being played out, and what Ted Cruz is doing in this censorship committees that are going through these witnesses and talking about things and bringing things to light, and how that plays into it. So first, some housekeeping. So I'd like to say thank all those that have donated in the past. I do this all by donations. These in these hard times, I know it's difficult for everybody. I'm not pushing my other design of the cryptocurrency in the way that I was. I'm working on a bigger way of having that finance, as opposed to having the people that were all enthusiastic about working with me on it, and we got off to a good start, but it all got ground down by COVID. Rather than trying to push that, I'm focusing on getting this program out and trying to expand and focus on this side of the battle. So please do what you can. My PayPal is down below. No donations from yesterday to today. So if something comes in every day, it does. Let's say give me some supercharge to keep focused on what's going on. So do what you can, and if you need to contact me to discuss either MoneyGram or Western Union, we can I get you the details for that. Just send me an email or contact me via Telegram, which is a preferred way, because then we can literally talk and figure out things. Okay, next, the Life Force app is available. Please sign up for Life Force, join one of the assemblies. I was on time for the assembly yesterday, but the assembly did not happen for California. So there was an issue with, timing of the, this was just like my fourth attempt to get on, and each time I was off by a day because of time zones or an hour here or there. So this time, just another reason, didn't make it, but we're going to keep persevering. Take the next step. So please join Life Force and do what you can to join one of those local, your state assembly, and we'll go from there. Let's see what else. So I've been talking about this quantum financial system or quick financial system. I have a friend in England who's a banker, also worked with me on Gold Grain Coin. He's been hearing this thing about a new system that went into play. So it got started on the first. So I've been trying to look into, well, what is this? More detail. So, I did have someone send me a video. It was called, Quantum Financial System. And so I went through it, and they said it's not a cryptocurrency. And when I read through it, they called it a virtual currency. It's again semantics. They're basically, calling it a digital currency as opposed to crypto, but it has blockchain. And they're using blockchain for doing an accounting of something that's is a virtual currency that's sitting over here, but they're doing the accounting with the blockchain. Anyway, I asked if this was Kim's system, and it is not. But anyway, I went through the video. It was a kind of I had some mixed feelings about what it was saying and how it was produced, and it seems like it's got two presentations thrown together to make one. Anyway, I was thinking of doing a review of it, and I'll read it again and see if it's worth doing. But it's not Kim's system. It is talking about the cross-border payment system, cross-border international payment system, the CIPS, which Kim is in control of. So they're claiming. Now this presentation that they put onto a video was from February of this year. So anyway, I'm going to continue looking into that and seeing if I can get more information if this other system actually did make it is running or not. Let's put it that way. But this system, they said that this could do trillions of transactions per second. They called it quantum financial system. But they're using photonic system, which in essence means light, which means fiber optic. I'm not sure. Anyway, okay, that aside. So, all right, I guess we can dig in now. Let's take a look. Here we go. So this is Mr. Andrew No. He is a reporter. You may have remembered that he got hit in the head with a milkshake while he was reporting on some of the disturbances at the autonomous zone that they had in Seattle. So this was, he had some severe injuries from that, a brain bleed. And but he's continued to report on Antifa. So he was called up to answer these questions. So this is where we're gonna start, and we're just gonna listen now. I've got several segments, about 6 segments, I think, lined up to go out of this. It was about a 2.5 hour meeting. And so I pulled out, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here, 5 minutes here, to kind of focus in on what the issues are. But let's listen to Andrew. And his mic.
Please make sure you've turned your microphone on, which is the switch right in the center of the microphone, on the base. Thank you, Chairman Cruz, Ranking Member Hirono, and members of the committee. Antifa is not a myth. I have been reporting on its activities since 2016. Its threats to my family and me have proved all too real. As any good journalist knows, the most important stories are often those not being told. This story is not being told. The American public knows little about this violent insurrectionary group and its radical ideology. I made Antifa my beat, and that makes me a target. Its followers regard my reporting as a threat to their mission, so they use violence and intimidation to try to frighten me into silence. First, they tried to discredit me, falsely branding me as a white supremacist. I happen to be gay and the son of Vietnamese refugees, so that was surprising. Next, they threatened to kill me and hurt my family. They almost succeeded last year when they surrounded me in the middle of downtown Portland. I was beaten so badly that I was hospitalized for subarachnoid hemorrhage. I still suffer from the effects of that injury. To this day, no one has been arrested. I'm apprehensive about speaking to Congress today, given that I'm a target. But I'm more afraid of the consequences of remaining silent. Unless we take action, what is happening in Portland today will soon be happening in cities across the country. What we've witnessed for more than 2 months in Portland are almost daily violent protests and riots led by Antifa. Even when they aren't starting fires, using explosives, and trying to maim officers, they leave threatening messages, such as decapitated pig heads outside the courthouse. Even after federal agencies agreed to pull back their visible presence starting July 30th, Antifa militants have attacked the Portland police building in a residential neighborhood on multiple occasions. Unfortunately, too many in the media have chosen to ignore or downplay this extremism masquerading as racial justice. In Portland, the violence has been organized and led by the local chapter of the Youth Liberation Front, a shadowy Antifa organization with secret membership.
So just to stop there. So what he brought up was the Youth Liberation Front. Now this is important to note because this is not being talked about on the news. This is an organization within their organization. And who are they targeting to get this stuff done is the youth, right? The young people, right? Because this was the army that has been created by the educational system, by the media, by Hollywood, right? It's radicalized our youth to basically think bad about the country, right? And so now everything is okay to do, anything to censor someone. So we'll get into that. Let's let him finish up this part.
The Youth Liberation Front has cells across the U.S. organized on social media sites like Twitter. They openly advocate for violent uprisings in Portland and elsewhere. To give one example, on July 25th, they called for national calls to action. Their followers obliged. We witnessed weekend street violence in Seattle, Oakland, Austin, Atlanta, Richmond, among other cities. There were multiple shootings, dozens of officer injuries, and even a homicide. I have worked undercover for months in Portland and other cities, and I've seen with my own eyes how hundreds of so-called protesters work together to carry out acts of organized criminality against government and civilians. Both violent and non-violent participants play a role. For example, Antifa, by their own admission, depend on mass numbers of peaceful protesters to act as human shields. Those privy to the organizational workings are divided into units, one to monitor police movement, one for street medics, one for vandals and arsonists, and so on. They coordinate on encrypted chat applications like Signal because they are extremely difficult for law enforcement to monitor. Antifa has mastered the art of making its violence appear innocuous. For example, projectiles that look like water balloons can be filled with chemicals. Small slingshots can be used to project rocks, glass, and ball bearings into police lines. Umbrella tips can be fastened with discreet pocket knives. Powerful handheld lasers can cause serious damage to the eyes. Antifa and its allies have made rioting an art form in Portland. They have access to a rich stream of cash flowing from platforms like GoFundMe, Venmo, and Cash App. Any conspirator arrested in Portland is instantly bailed out and ready for the next night of violent protest. I come to you today with the message for senators of both parties. Antifa's goal is not only to abolish the criminal justice system, it is to bring down the republic itself. Burn it down, they say. But don't take my word for it. Go read their literature, listen to their chants, and look at their graffiti messages. Portland is a canary in the coal mine for America. Look to my city to see what happens when a group like Antifa is left unchecked. Thank you.
So, it's not imaginary, Mr. Nadler, right? He doesn't believe it exists, right? Antifa. What is that? The Democrats playing this game of not even mentioning Antifa at all. They won't talk about it, and they won't condemn the violence. So, this is a night and day between the two parties. So we can see whose side wants to tear down the whole country. Well, apparently the Democrats. Right? So, all right, we'll go on to the next. Now, this, just so you know, this is going to be a little bit out of order because they went through an introduction for about 5 witnesses, and then they went back and asked questions. So this is the questions of no, Andy, no. Yeah, so I just put it there. So it might seem like it's jumping back and forth, but probably okay. Just letting you know.
This is for your testimony. Mr. No, let me start with you. Is Antifa violent? And what specific acts of violence have you personally witnessed?
Yes, they're violent, and I'll start with what I witnessed was what happened to me on the 29th of June 2019. That was a ostensibly anti-racist protest that was organized in downtown Portland. It involved Rose City Antifa, which is an organization. It involved the local chapter of the Democratic Socialists of America, and I came there with my GoPro and my iPhone to record, and I was beaten by a mob, people who used brass knuckles that were hidden under gloves, punching me repeatedly in the front, the top, and the back of my head. And then when I thought they were done, that was just the half of it. Next came all those milkshakes and other unknown liquids that were hurled at my face. And I know milkshakes can sound kind of cute as a protest, but really when they're thrown at force in your face, it's a viscous liquid. You can't see where to go. So that was one of my first experiences with their violence directly. Since then, I've seen numerous times in Portland.
And is it right that you received significant injuries from that?
Yes, a brain bleed from that.
Please continue, I'm sorry.
And I wasn't the only victim that day. There were 7 other people who were hospitalized. There was only 1 conviction related to another person who was assaulted, beaten on the head with a brick and a baton and other weapons. So Portland is the epicenter. It's been going on since 2016, really in response to the surprise election win of Trump. And what I see happening there is the local politicians have been sort of nurturing and allowing this extremism to go on. And that's why it's in the predicament that it's in now, where there's over 2 months of violent protests. And I see all these headlines talking about how things are peaceful now because the federal authorities are less visible. That's inaccurate. That's a falsehood. Yesterday and the day before, where the attacks happen, instead of the federal court downtown, Antifa Black Bloc militants tried a new tactic. They attacked the Southeast Precinct in Southeast Portland. So this problem is not going away. It's continuing, and hopefully my testimony here to Congress shows that I don't come with a partisan message. If you read their literature, they're very clear in calling for the abolishment in the U.S.
So we can see that he's coming out and he's telling us that since Trump was elected, they've been nurturing it in these Democrat cities, but it's been festering in Portland and being supported by the local politicians. Nurturing, meaning but they want it to grow. So that's what he sees, right? Firsthand witness to it, and experience the violence of it. So let's move to the next one. Now this one is basically a professor. I believe he's in Berkeley. No, of course that's Ted Cruz, but to start off with, and he's well known and is really talking about what the situation has been.
Ranking Member Hirano, it's an honor to appear before you today to discuss the growing threat of free speech in the United States from an array of extremist groups. The protests in the aftermath of the killing of George Floyd have served to focus attention on the transcendent issue of racial discrimination. I think we all agree we cannot let this moment pass for a national dialogue on racial justice. That dialogue, however, is increasingly turning into a diatribe on our campuses, on our streets, even in our media. We're losing the opportunity to reach consensus because of rising violence and intolerance for opposing views. If we are to come together as a nation, we have to be able to speak to one another freely and without fear. I welcome this hearing because I fear that we are at a crossroads in this country on free speech. We're witnessing unprecedented erosion of this defining right in our democracy. The protests around this country involve a wide array of groups on the political spectrum, from both the far right and the far left. I discussed that in my written testimony. However, Antifa is arguably the most successful anti-speech movement of this generation, using physical threats and intimidation to silence those with dissenting views. It is all part of achieving what Antifa calls no platforming, or denying people with opposing views the ability to be heard. Recently, the alleged Antifa ringleader, who led efforts to topple statues in Washington, D.C., proclaimed the movement is winning. He's right. They are winning. They're winning because universities are now effectively blocking conservative and opposing speakers. They're winning because the media and politicians downplay such violence. They're winning because local authorities are ordering police to stand down or prosecutors to drop charges. And they're winning because free speech is being treated as a destabilizing or threatening factor in our schools and society. In my written testimony, I explore ways for Congress to reinforce free speech through a mix of measures from federal enforcement to federal funding. It is by no means an easy task because government enforcement itself can chill free speech. However, threats against free speech have now reached a critical mass in our schools and on our streets. We can either act or we can remain passive pedestrians to what inevitably comes next. House Judiciary Chairman Jerry Nadler recently said that accounts of Antifa violence in places like Portland are a myth. Antifa is no myth. The decentralized organization and fluid communications used by Antifa groups give superficial support to such denials. Antifa trains members to remain anonymous. It's all here in the Antifa handbook, which explains the strategy of anonymity by mass to allow the offensive side of block tactics to flourish. Antifa was expressly founded as a movement at war with free speech, defining the right itself as a tool of oppression. That is also clearly stated in this handbook. The signature of the group is a self-righteous, rage-fueled violence that parallels fascistic groups that they claim to oppose. Tellingly, the Antifa handbook begins with the quote, "Fascism is not to be debated, it is to be destroyed." And fascism is a term that morphs into a wide variety of targets deemed unacceptable by Antifa, from capitalism to patriarchy to police. Antifa bears strong resemblance to groups that emerged in earlier periods of attacks on free speech, like the Red Scare. Simply replacing anti-communism with anti-fascism does not materially change the same anti-free speech purpose of these movements. The greatest threat to free speech in this country remains the original threat: silence. Silence kills free speech. It is the silence of professors who watch as their colleagues are threatened, harassed, or fired for voicing dissenting views. It's the silence of students who watch their fellow students as they are attacked for voicing their own beliefs. It is the silence of reporters who watch as their colleagues are fired or forced to retire for writing opposing views. Most importantly, it is the silence of politicians who refuse to protect the exercise of free speech. Let me end by saying that during the Red Scare, Attorney General Charles Gregory said this about dissenters: "May God have mercy on them, for they need not to expect none from an outraged people and an avenging government." The avenging elements in our society are now found in groups like Antifa, and a growing number of writers, academics, and others who are embracing orthodoxy over diversity of thought. Antifa and related groups thrive through intimidation, and they prevail through inaction. All that is required for free speech to die in America is for America to be silent. Thank you very much for allowing me to speak today.
Thank you.
So you can see that why censorship is a part of this system of how we're waging, or there's an attempt to start a civil war by way of censorship. By creating this violence to silence people of opposing opinions, all of those that say, well, I will basically fight for your right to say whatever you want, even if I disagree with it. That's not legitimate to them. No matter what your logical argument is going to be, facts bear nothing, have no weight at all to them. They will just call it fascist, just like they'll call Andrew No a white supremacist when he's not white, and obviously not a supremacist. So it makes no difference. It's just their rhetoric against anyone who's not falling in line with them exactly, right? And even if you do fall in line with them exactly, if you're in a position of authority within the government that they're trying to destroy, you're going to be destroyed. Like those mayors in those Democratic cities where they're being run out of their own homes and they're going and living in other locations. But they keep saying, oh, but there's no problem here. It's just barbecues and summer fairs. So we can see that this is why censorship is being used. We're seeing it in the shadow banning of, say, my channel or in all the other channels that are in opposition. Right? We've been squeezed down to where our voices are hard to hear, but we have to not be silent. I refuse to be silent. I'm going to do my best to basically yell through YouTube and other platforms as well, Parler, for example, and some of these other BitChute and that. So it's these other platforms. They get hard to manage when you're trying to do so much. But I gotta try and get my caught up on posting everything that I do on YouTube over there as well. One more thing, right? All right, we're gonna go ahead and continue. Let me go to the next one here. Now this is the second part, the same. One second. Sorry, I've got. I had a warning come up, so all right, let me go ahead and grab this one now. Okay, so this is again Turley. It's not Andrew, but it's leading from where he left off on answering a question to Turley. So now we're going to hear the question for Turley.
You testify that Antifa is profoundly anti-speech and violent. Can you elaborate on that, please?
Yes, if you go through the Antifa handbook and look at their literature, it's quite express. As stated in the handbook, they reject the premise of what they call a classical liberal view of free speech. Specifically, they object to statements like, I may disagree with what you have to say, but I would give my life to defend it. They reject that. They believe that free speech itself is a tool of oppression. And that has been the message on campuses. What I thought was disturbing about these statements that Antifa is a myth is that many of us on campus have been dealing with Antifa for years, and Antifa is winning. There is a tremendous movement, an anti-free speech movement in the United States. My testimony doesn't really go to these protests. I think that both the far right and far left are doing bad things in these protests. Antifa members have been arrested in these protests. Antifa groups like Rose City Antifa have been leading some of these efforts. But my greater concern, and the one that I would hope that members would look at, is this anti-free speech movement that Antifa is part of. I've been teaching for 30 years. I have never seen the level of fear and intimidation on campuses that we see today. Faculty are afraid to speak out about issues. We can't have a dialogue about the important issues occurring today because there's a fear that you might be accused of being reactionary or racist. We've had law professors who've been physically attacked, have required police protection. That's the environment that we're developing. And for people that think that Antifa and groups like it can be allies, they don't know Antifa. Those of us who've been teaching on campuses can tell you about these groups. And the alarm that I have is because I'm watching my profession, the teaching profession, die with free speech. Administrators are not protecting academic freedom. Why should they protect free speech? We're seeing many of these speakers are being prevented from speaking on campus under various theories. And the message is clear to faculty, it's clear to students. There's a new orthodoxy that you should not confront and you certainly shouldn't disagree with. And I go through those details in my testimony.
So, Professor Turley, I very much agree with you that we ought to be united in condemning violence from whatever ideological origin it comes from, whether right wing, left wing, or no wing at all. If you're committing violence against fellow Americans, that ought to be condemned. You ought to be arrested. You ought to be prosecuted. You ought to go to jail. I do think it is striking that in the entire course of this hearing, seven Democratic senators spoke in this hearing. Not a single Democratic senator condemned Antifa. Not one of them condemned Antifa's violence and terrorism. Do you think it is harmful that the sitting Attorney General of Minnesota, a Democrat, posed with the book you just held up in your testimony, the Antifa Handbook, gleefully modeling it? Do you think it is helpful for elected Democrats to be holding out a violent anti-speech organization like Antifa and acting essentially as apologists for it? Is that good for our democracy?
I criticized Mr. Ellison for that tweet. There are some Democratic politicians that have not only failed to denounce Antifa, but have actually, in that case, seemed to give it a shout-out. In that case, Mr. Ellison said that they would put the fear in the heart of Donald Trump. But what he doesn't see is that Antifa is putting the fear in the hearts of many people other than Donald Trump. If you go to campuses today, you will find more advocates for limiting speech than protecting it. They're winning. And when you see pictures like Mr. Ellison's picture with Antifa, it's very disturbing because Antifa's not coming after him. They're not even coming after Democrats. They're coming after Republicans, conservatives, and those of us in the free speech community. They're coming after us. But don't think we'll be the last ones. That's not how this works.
Thank you, Professor Turley. Senator Hirono.
Okay. So he's talking about, the actual educational system dying, university system dying because of this issue. Because they're not able to speak. How many times have we heard where students say, well, I can't say what I want to say, or I can't write the paper I want to write, because if I do, I'll get a bad grade and I'll get failed, and then I won't be able to pay back those super humongous loans that they're being put under for a stupid education. Even when I was back in college, I was going to Cal State Long Beach for a master's in electrical engineering, and I came upon a free speech zone. That's 30 years ago. Came upon a free speech zone. As soon as you have to have a zone for free speech, where you're not supposed to be bothered, you can say what you want, you put up walls around it. Now, what if they turn that area for free speech into a fenced area? What if they didn't make it a bricked area? What if they put it down in the basement of some building? Say anything you want over there until they don't even want you to say anything down there. It's just a slippery slope. So it's been happening for a long time. I mean, I was upset about it when I found it, and I spoke up against it at that time. I said, well, come over here out of that free speech zone. Come over here, I'll talk to you over here. But, this has been a tactical plan laid out for a long, long time. The communist, infiltration, the Red Scare, all of that. It was all something that was really happening. Now, who's the bad guy? The McCarthy was the bad guy in the past, right? Why? Because he brought Hollywood up for being communist. Well, was he really the bad guy? I'm sure he used some very, strong-handed techniques. But maybe, just coming out of World War II and having to deal with the Soviet Union being formed, maybe that was what was needed. I don't know. I wasn't alive back then to be firsthand. But I know that I can't trust what I've been told about it through the mainstream media, through the movies. They all make McCarthy out to be the bad guy. Since they're wrong about everything, they must be wrong about that. But anyway, we'll reserve my opinion completely, as I just don't know. But I can tell that this has been going on for a long time. Okay, so that's it for No and Turley. I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to bring up someone from Black Lives Matter that also testified. Now, there's an important part of what she's saying that I want to focus in on. So let's bring her up, and we'll go from there. Now, she used to be an aide of Harry Reid. That's the former Senate Majority Leader from Nevada.
Also a former staffer for Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid. I am Nikenge Harmon Johnson, an Oregonian, an American, and a lawyer. My mother, father, and their parents were born in this country, as were my great-grandparents and going back generations. My family were kidnapped Africans, then enslaved people forced to work for no compensation. Later, my family members were steel workers, post office letter carriers, law enforcement officers, military veterans, homemakers, and artists. Regardless of our economic or social status, we all share something in common beyond our family ties. None of us has yet to enjoy the full rights due to American citizens under the United States Constitution. In our fight for civil rights, we've alternatingly been ignored and targeted by local and federal agencies. So this is nothing new.
Well, I'm not saying that there's not racism or a biased. I've experienced bias against myself, believe it or not. Not about me being a minority per se, but everyone experienced some sort of bias. But I want to say that if her family had stayed in Africa, they wouldn't have been in the position of having been mail carriers and all the other professions that they got into, even as she's become a lawyer. That's happened way in the past. So how do you want to basically hold the country responsible when it was the one that ended slavery or made an effort to end slavery worldwide, but first in the country, especially the Republican Party? It's all backwards. Everything they do is about something that is backwards. So I think that she should be grateful for being in the country, but she's not, right? So anyway, we'll keep going.
Nevertheless, we persevered in spite of it all, because we are indeed Americans. Now we take to the streets to declare that our lives matter, and we've been met by dangerous federal forces sent from Washington, D.C. to silence the movement for Black lives. It is difficult to see this government respond so inappropriately with such violent and expensive force at a time when those resources should be spent to build justice in our community and staunch the deadly, growing COVID-19 pandemic. In recent years in Portland, month after month, white supremacists marched in our city. They even bust in thugs and would-be Nazis to harass Portlanders. Some were promoted by one of today's witnesses for the majority. Black and brown Oregonians shared tips, and we warned one another to avoid downtown, because those ridiculous but demonstrably deadly white supremacists were at it again in our community. In spite of Portland's disgust.
So I don't recall seeing any news about busloads of white supremacists being bussed in. The only white supremacists that I see being bussed in are Antifa. They're white, mostly. They're being bussed in. They're all wearing black. They're organized. And they're saying everything as though they were white supremacists. But they're saying, we're against white supremacy. We're against white privilege. But they're the white. And it's backwards. Everything backwards. So let's keep going.
Our local police actually assisted them, even though at times they were armed with guns and weapons, as they rallied near the federal building in downtown Portland. Local police regularly chatted with them via text message. So is it any surprise, Senators, that the same police would declare Black protesters and their supporters as rioters? They are not on the side of Black Portlanders, and they do not stand for the justice that we seek. Also note, federal officials did not lift a finger to deter or quiet earlier white supremacist crowds. Federal officials, other than Oregon's own congressional delegation, did not stay concerned about dangerous men rallying near the federal building that we've heard so much about today. Even after one of those white supremacists attacked a Black woman and 2 Black girls and murdered 2 white men and attempted to murder a third, who stopped him from harming those girls. I do not recall this body holding hearings to listen to the hurt and harm those regressives caused. But here we are today. What's different? Now the federal government is involved because the current administration has taken a side. The side of the status quo and continued disenfranchisement of African Americans.
So this is kind of the point I want to. She's drawing this division between the white supremacists, which means everyone who's not in Black Lives Matter. Doesn't matter what color you are, what your if you're like Andrew No, he's a gay. I forget what country, but he's from another country, or his family was, and so he's obviously not a white supremacist, but they called him one. So everyone is a white supremacist, unless you're in their group. So it doesn't matter what she's saying. It's not really about black versus white. This is the ruse. This is how they're starting to create this situation of saying white supremacists are bussed in. Well, the ones that are being bussed in are white Antifa, right? They're the ones that are coming in, and they're being forced to do, paid to force people to be silent, to get out of the way, to scare people into silence until they can create a civil war. So this is the stage being set. This is what she is talking about. She's talking about this is the two sides, black versus white. Let's continue.
Contrast those events with the past 2 months in Portland. Following the police murdering George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Kendra James, and Jason Washington, people in my community dared to stand up for Black lives. We gathered together to insist that the time is now for America to be as good as its promise to us all. That Black Lives Matter must be a bold and unexpected statement for some officials in the Beltway. Either that, or they enjoy the opportunity to create political theater for its own purpose. That is why they sent who we now know are federal police to Oregon. So after weeks of demonstrations that had nothing to do with the federal building, or the federal government really, but were focused on local issues in our community, the feds inserted themselves. Supporters of the movement for Black Lives were met with batons, burning hot munitions, hard rubber bullets, and chemical gases that federal employees fired into the nightly crowds, as you've heard from other speakers. Worse, however,
which was at the federal buildings. They were only at the federal buildings. So why would they have been experiencing this unless they were doing something at the federal building? And we've seen the videos of them attacking the federal building. Now, if they attacked the federal building, they would be followed, and even if they went blocks or miles away, they'd be arrested by the feds. But they were the ones that were making the issue, right? So the feds didn't go scouring house to house, just looking for anyone that wasn't at the federal building.
Federal officials who took oath to defend this country, its citizens, and the Constitution demonstrated to Oregon and to the world that when there's a political or social movement they do not approve, some politicians may deploy Border Patrol and other feds to shut it down.
Just another thing, if you watch her eyes, she's actually reading a teleprompter. So this isn't off the cuff. This is her speaking something that's prepared. Watch her eyes.
It is fascist behavior, the likes of which this country has fought against in foreign wars. I'm an anti-racist, and I'm an anti-fascist. All Americans should be. Fortunately, those misguided federal officials and their police also showed us something else. When confronted by organized, resolute protesters who greeted their violence with bubbles, slideshows, barbecue cookouts, and nudity, the federal forces floundered. Federal police went too far for days, perhaps thinking that they could drive the people of Oregon back into our homes out of fear. Instead, the opposite occurred. Thousands more Oregonians gathered in Portland to speak, to demand, to holler, and to sing that Black Lives Matter. Do you know about Portlander Mac, a local organizer? He was using his mobile phone when suddenly he was hit in the forehead with a paint projectile and concussed. Mac was standing 50 yards away from the federal building when he was shot. Fortunately, he was wearing a bicycle helmet.
50 yards away. That's not all that far, right? If you were in that area, right, and there was violence going on all around, 50 yards is not far away at all. So it was it's half a football field. I'm sorry, that's actually not even half a football field. It's not, yeah, it is. Sorry. So anyway, let's move on. I want to now go back to Ted Cruz. So this is really, we've got two more videos about this. This is Ted Cruz really summing up things, right? And then talking about the Democrat senator from Hawaii she's going to refer to her and ask her to condemn Antifa. And then we'll bring that video up.
For your work going undercover with those white supremacist groups, I emphatically agree that white supremacists are ignorant, bigoted morons, and those who are violent should be criminally prosecuted and locked up for as long as humanly possible. And I will also note that I'm Cuban American, and white supremacists hate me too. But at the same time, it's fairly striking that elected Democrats want to ignore the violence of Antifa. They want to ignore the violence on the left, and they just scream white supremacists, rather than condemn violence from wherever it is coming. The 277 injuries of federal law enforcement officers in Portland are coming from the left, and not a single Democrat on this committee acknowledges that. David Dorn, African-American police officer, was murdered. Retired police officer in St. Louis, who is black, was murdered. Not a single one of the seven Democratic senators who spoke at this hearing mentioned David Dorn's name. Patrick Underwood, another officer, Senator Durbin was the one Democrat who mentioned Patrick Underwood's name. Another black officer murdered. We see Democrats who repeat the slogan Black Lives Matter, but apparently those black lives are not worth discussing. The black lives of police officers murdered by terrorists. I would note as well, when it comes to Black Lives Matter, as a proposition, the statement Black Lives Matter is unquestionably true. It is a truism, it is indisputable, period, full stop. Black lives matter and matter enormously. Every human being is a precious gift from God. That being said, and quite rightly, the overwhelming majority of Americans agree with the proposition Black Lives Matter. It should be 100% of Americans agree with the proposition Black Lives Matter. That is different, I would note, than the specific organization that has taken up the name Black Lives Matter. And I think it is important to draw a distinction between the statement Black Lives Matter, that is indisputably right, and the organization that it denominated Black Lives Matter. That organization...
Bravo. Bravo, Ted Cruz. To distinguish between the actual phrase Black Lives Matter and the organization is appropriate. Because you cannot disagree with Black Lives Matter. Obviously they do. You could basically add the note, but it's a racist statement to say so because you're leaving out everyone else. If you say all lives matter, it's not racist. If I say white lives matter, does it sound racist? If I say Asian lives matter, does it sound racist? If you feel that there's a degree or shades of racism within the statements, then there's something wrong with your programming because you're thinking along the lines that they want you to think, that Black Lives Matter is the only phrase that is legitimate. You can't say all lives matter, white lives matter, Asian lives matter, babies' lives matter. You can't say any of that. So bravo, Ted Cruz. All right, let's continue with Ted here.
It was founded in 2013. It was founded by three self-described radical Marxists. The three founders of it were Alicia Garza, Opal Tometi, and Patrice Kahn-Cullors. And some of the facts behind this organization, Black Lives Matter, are important for people to know. Cullors said she and Garza, this is her words, are, quote, trained Marxists.
Trained.
And she said, quote, I read, I study, adding Mao, Marx, and Lenin to my knowledge of books. Mao, Marx, and Lenin, or Mao and Lenin, rather, murdered millions, were among the worst tyrants humanity has ever known. The Black Lives Matter group, their founders, have explicitly praised Marxist Angela Davis. Now, who is Angela Davis? They said she's a mentor. Angela Davis was the Communist Party vice presidential nominee in 1980 and 1984. She's explicitly a communist. She was affiliated with the Black Panther Party. Cullors, one of the three founders of the Black Lives Matter organization, said, quote, Angela Davis is a mentor of mine. Not only that, the founders have praised domestic terrorist Assata Shakur. Now, who is that? Assata Shakur is a convicted cop killer. Murdered a police officer. She is right now today on the FBI's most wanted list and is likely a fugitive in Cuba. And by the way, it isn't just a passing praise. Ms. Cullors wrote a memoir, When They Call You a Terrorist, a Black Lives Matter memoir that included a foreword written by communist Angela Davis. And by the way, it's not me calling her a communist. She was the vice presidential nominee of the Communist Party. She is explicitly a communist. And an opening epigraph from Shakur, the cop killer on the FBI's most wanted list. Not only that, in terms of funding, the organization BLM is financially sponsored by the Thousand Currents, an organization vice chair by Susan Rosenberg. Who's Rosenberg? a member of the leftist violent terrorist organization, the May 19th Communist Organization, involved in multiple politically motivated bombings. Now, what does the organization Black Lives Matter support? When you go to the website, they tell you they're not hiding it. Their top priority is defunding the police across the United States of America. It's not defending equal justice for everyone. That everyone supports. It is abolishing and defunding police departments in every community in this country. Not only that, the group BLM has a long record of anti-Semitism and anti-Israel attacks, including arguing that Israel is a, quote, apartheid state that is committing genocide. And by the way, the BLM founders who revere Angela Davis's record, profoundly anti-Semitic and anti-Israel. Indeed, she was asked, would she be willing to speak up on behalf of Jewish prisoners of conscience in the Soviet Union? She was a big apologist for the Soviet Union, and she responded when she visited Moscow. So she's meeting with the Soviet leaders in Moscow, and her response was, instead of speaking up for the Jewish prisoners of conscience, she would urge that they be kept in prison because, quote, they are all Zionist, fascist, and opponents of socialism. What else does BLM, the organization, support? On its website, it has called for a, quote, boycott of white capitalism. In 2017, they called on people not to spend any money with white corporations. And not only that, the BLM website says that one of their objectives is dismantling the, quote, patriarchal practices and disrupting the Western prescribed nuclear family. That's what they say their objectives are. Now, the reason that matters is right now corporate America is desperate to demonstrate their virtue as we see great racial dissension. So Black Lives Matter, BLM, the group, raises money on Act Blue, the fundraising mechanism for virtually every elected Democrat in Congress. Among the donors to BLM, the organization, according to public reports, include the company Ubisoft, which has given between $50,000 and $100,000, DoorDash, which has given reportedly $500,000, Amazon, which has given an unidentified portion of $10 million, Gatorade, which has given an unidentified portion of $500,000.
White corporations.
Nabisco, which has given an unidentified portion of $500,000. Deckers, which has given an unidentified portion of $500,000. Microsoft, which has given $250,000. Dropbox, which has given $500,000. And Fitbit, which the amount given is not identified. I would note Microsoft, the largest individual shareholder, is Bill Gates. More than ironic that Microsoft is funding an organization calling for boycotting all white corporations. Bill Gates is white. Microsoft is literally funding an organization calling for Microsoft to be defunded. Jeff Bezos, the largest owner of Amazon, who likewise is funding this radical Marxist group. Jeff Bezos is white too. And he's funding an organization that is calling for the boycotting of Amazon. This is dangerous.
It's dangerous. But there's something else going on there. Why would these individuals, these tech giants, even Amazon's a tech giant, technology company, why are they funding this? Why do they want to destroy America? Because that's what Black Lives Matter, the organization's intent, is doing. Why? So we have to look at that. There is a reason why that they want to do it, right? Because they think at the end of the day, they're going to be richer and in control of more. And probably realize that there's going to be much less black people. Black Lives Matter, the result will be a lot less black people on the planet, whether in Africa or in America or anywhere else, as well as Asians, because they are eugenics, how do you say it? but they believe in eugenics. Gates' father, big eugenics, Planned Parenthood, basically, formed for the purpose of eliminating the minority races. So they're funding this for the purpose of eliminating, say 90% of the people on the planet. And in America's what's standing in their way. That's the reason why they got to tear it down. But it doesn't matter what the rhetoric is or going on, what the rhetoric is about this Black Lives Matter, this white supremacy. That doesn't matter. The end goal is to destroy America. Have a civil war start so that it breaks apart. That's what it's about. All right, we're almost done. A minute and a half.
And it's worth understanding that when corporate America floods millions of dollars into explicitly Marxist terrorist organizations that glorify cop killers, that glorify violence, that the violence and terrorism that flows from that should not be surprising. Without objection, I'm going to enter into the record an article from the Washington Examiner dated July 23rd, 2020, the title of which is, "Who is Black Lives Matter?" And I would encourage anyone who wants to understand who this organization is to read this article. On the proposition as a value proposition, do Black Lives Matter? Absolutely yes. And our nation was founded on the proposition that all men are created equal regardless of race or skin color. But the organization that has seized that name is very different, and if they succeeded with their stated number one objective of defunding and abolishing every police department, many, many more Black lives would be lost because more African Americans would be murdered without the police officers that bravely risked their lives to defend those communities. Senator Rohn.
Sometimes I don't think you listen.
So we're gonna switch gears here for a moment. Let me line this one up. So again, this is the Democratic senator from Hawaii, Hirono. I'm not exactly Hirono. I'll pronounce her name, but this is typical of what we see. It's like completely, none of the facts matter, nothing. So it's all upside down, right? Everything is backwards. So it doesn't matter all the facts laid out, what was said. This is what she says.
Sometimes I don't think you listen. So how many times have I had to say that we all should be denouncing violent extremists of every stripe?
Does that include
by the way, I have the time. By the way, the Republicans are constantly using, I have to say, you brought it up yourself, the deaths of these black police officers, Patrick Underwood and David Dorn, for making political points. And the fact that it was right-wing extremists who killed Officer Underwood, that seems to be lost in this argument. And now there are all these attacks about Black Lives Matter and what they're saying. I mean, how many of us even think that defunding police departments should be taken literally? I mean, I certainly don't. So, we have this pesky thing called freedom of speech. And I'd say that the people who support Black Lives Matter, and if they're calling for various boycotts and all that, that's called freedom of speech. And that's what this hearing title is. Protecting speech. So all I can say is, look, we should all join hands and denouncing and
sing Kumbaya.
Whatever words you want to use
Kumbaya,
about violent extremism
Kumbaya.
Of all stripes. And I think we can all agree on that. So to constantly accuse Democrats of not caring about that is really, I can only say that you aren't listening. So I hope this is the end of this hearing, Mr. Chairman, and that we don't have to listen to any more of your rhetorical speeches. Thank you very much. I'm leaving.
Well, I appreciate the, as always, kind and uplifting words of Senator Hirono. And I would also note that throughout her remarks, she still did not say a negative word about Antifa, nor has any Democrat here. They instead engage in a political game where they depend. You're welcome to say something negative about Antifa right now. Okay, she declined to speak, so that is the position of the Democratic Party. I would note also that of the 7 Democratic senators who spoke, not a one of them apologized for or denounced multiple Democrats calling law enforcement officers Nazis, stormtroopers, and Gestapo. To be fair, I have not heard the word Nazi, but stormtrooper was Nancy Pelosi and Gestapo was another Democratic leader. That is less than helpful. I thank each of the witnesses for your testimony. I thank you for defending free speech. And I thank you for speaking out against violence and against terrorism. The record in this hearing will be held open for 1 week. Senators may follow up with the witnesses of either this panel or the previous panel with written questions. If you receive written questions, you are asked to submit the answers to those questions by the close of business 1 week from today. And with that, this hearing is adjourned.
All right.
Sometimes I don't think you listen.
Nope, I don't want to listen. Actually, that's why I cut it off on her, because I didn't want to listen to her. But I did listen, so that's why I recorded it on a separate clip. Because, to just, the hypocrisy of what the Democrats are doing, it's so blatant, right? You sometimes wonder, are they really that stupid? Right? Do they really don't get it? Or are they really that corrupt and just, reading their script? So, how's this tie in? What's going on? So we can see that we're having silencing of everyone, scare tactics to keep people silent. And they're doing this for what reason? To get to a point where people break, where people start fighting, killing one another. We've seen people defend themselves with rifles, and we've seen people dying because of this, right? But just like George Floyd was that trigger point, they're looking for a trigger point. And they have scripts. And they basically write out the scripts long ago on what was going to happen. They knew they needed to get a flashpoint. So let's look at the flashpoint. Now, I'm going to go to and we know a video that they did today. So no, I was looking for this, but this is the gentleman that was identified, and I talked about this the other day, by 4chan as the actual shooter of a Trump supporter. Right? Now, it's talking about the YouTube channel Vice doing an interview with him and him admitting it. Again, keep in mind a flashpoint. I'm going to go ahead and play this.
Lawyers suggest that I shouldn't even be saying anything, but I feel it's important that the world at least gets a little bit of what's really going on, because there's been a lot of propaganda put out there. I have no choice. I mean, I had a choice. I could have sat there and watched them kill a friend of mine of color. But I wasn't going to do that.
So we know that's a lie, right? Because we just saw there was no one around the guy. They just zoomed in on him. They had a coordinated attack. Now, there were some other videos I wanted to bring up and show this, but I lost track of it and I couldn't find it before we went on. But that's why I brought up And We Know. But you can see that there was no. He's lying right here. Now, the lie is purposeful. Why? What happens when people lie to you? You get upset, right? So again, trigger point. Think about that. We'll continue.
Pretty shocking right there. Ian Miles Chung put this out unbelievable that Vice is running an interview with a man who executed a Trump supporter in cold blood, allowing him to run with the narrative that Trump supporters were out to kill blacks in Portland, ? Well, the president chimed in. Why aren't the Portland police arresting the cold-blooded killer of Aaron J. Danielson? Do your job and do it fast. Everybody knows who this thug is. No wonder Portland is going to hell at the Justice Department. Well, it turns out right after that was posted, looking around, Andy Ngo posted that Portland Antifa shooter Michael Renault has been killed by law enforcement. Details to come. The guy who killed the Portland Trump supporter died in Lacey, Washington. Sources were telling him this. And then the New York Times said breaking suspect in the fatal Portland shooting is killed by officers during arrest. So it turned out to be true. The man being investigated in the fatal shooting. Now here's how the New York Times covered it. Here's how they worded it. A man being investigated in the fatal shooting of a right-wing activist who was part of a pro-Trump caravan in Portland, Oregon, was killed on Thursday night when authorities moved to arrest him, according to 3 law enforcement officials familiar with the investigations. The officials said the suspect, Michael Renault, was killed during the encounter in Lacey, Washington. Well, an arrest warrant had been issued by the Portland police earlier Thursday on the same day that Vice News published an interview with him in which he appeared to admit to the shooting, saying, I had no choice. The Portland police had been investigating Saturday's shooting death, one of the supporters of President Trump who came into downtown Portland, and he clashed with protesters demonstrating against racial injustice and police brutality. So they call them protesters in the New York Times. They say they're demonstrating against racial injustice, and police brutality. We know that is all a lie. So they continue.
I'm going to go over to Andy Ngo's Twitter page. So, Unmasked, Andy Ngo. Let's see. Oh, he posted some new things. So, okay. We might take some time to get to it. So, Riders swarm, knock over tables. I lost the one I wanted to show you. All right, well, I'm sure it's going to be here, but he posted, I guess, more things. These are all Antifa members, it looks like, that they're calling on. So here, okay, this is the gentleman, the alleged shooter. So Renault, alleged shooter, was arrested in Eastern Oregon with a stash of drugs and an illegal pistol. He was arrested by Portland Antifa riot with an illegal gun. He fought the police. So those charges were never pursued. Oh, this is a past. This is what happened in the past. I guess that's what he's saying. Oh, here, the criminal complaint against Antifa shooter Michael Renault was released. It shows stills from the security camera, which catches the last moments of Jay Daniels' life. Also shows Renault turned into a parking garage to ready his gun. So, he was going out after him to kill him, and he was not, the other guy was unarmed, right? So he purposely murdered him. Another one. The Noah Farley, the pro-Antifa Portland writer, has made his account private. His last tweet from yesterday promoted his Vice news story on Michael Rinaldi. Rinaldi was later killed in the day by U.S. Marshals Task Force. So here's, I think, the point that I want to make about this. Drifting around a little bit. So Trump said that this guy should be arrested, right? There was an arrest warrant already out by the time Trump had actually tweeted that. So they were going to go arrest him. He went to another state. So he crossed state lines, making it a federal issue, first of all. That basically gives federal jurisdiction over it. But also, they were going to go and arrest him. Now, he knew they were coming for him. Now, did he fight them? Now, I would say that, he's would be an individual that they'd really want to take alive, right? They would take a lot of precautions to get him alive. Thinking Flashpoint, maybe it might be possible that Antifa might have been the one that actually pulled the trigger. Just saying, they're looking for a flashpoint. They want someone to die. Now, who is Antifa going to blame now, right? They're going to blame the same people. It's the cops. The cops killed our guy, and he was just defending himself, right? He did this video saying, hey, I was just defending myself from an unarmed guy. That they went out hunting for someone, a Trump supporter, to target. This guy was no angel, but he is being used as a pawn, a useful idiot, as the communists like to call them. People for the cause. They sacrifice them left and right, even if it ends up being hundreds of millions of people dying for the cause. It's okay because it's for the whole. It's what's good for the whole. So the individual rights have no bearing, have no value. So I'm going to see that we're going to see something along this lines come about because they're going to use this as a trigger point. Don't let it upset people. Don't get, unless I'm going to say this. Be upset. Be vocal. Don't be violent. It's not the time to get violent. This is not the time to of course, you have to protect yourself. If you're being attacked, you protect yourself. But don't get into mobs of armed vigilantes as they are doing. Do not allow the civil war to start. Nip it in the bud. Okay, so we're running a little long. It's an hour and 20 minutes. Sorry to keep you guys up if you're staying awake listening to me. I'm going to check the group. Hello, everybody. Okay, so we'll close it down here. Again, I exist by way of donations. Please do what you can. We will be back tomorrow, and we will go over, see how this unfolds. And I expect we're going to be seeing some more coming out about this. Until then, we'll see you tomorrow.